Since transitioning from head coach, president of basketball operations in June of 2021, Brad Stevens has orchestrated a masterclass, in my opinion, in roster building. And his executive style is defined by being aggressive with proactive trades. And of course, over this past year, with his navigation of the Celtics out of the second apron following the 2025 NBA season. And it's been a move that's been praised by media outlets and insiders everywhere. 2 Executive of the Year awards in 2024 and this past season in 2026, and directly coincided with them winning the 2024 NBA championship. With that being said, Trey, you have a long-standing beef seemingly with Brad Stevens for some of the moves that you deemed questionable over the years, put it politely, to the point that you have said, and I quote, Stevens should resign for being an idiot. End quote. So, Trey, my first question for you to start off everything is, what is your exact beef with Brad Stevens?
So let's just start with this, because a lot of people use the term overrated. And my follow-up anytime someone says overrated is, well, what's he rated? Well, if you just go and ask any random NBA fan, I would say 9 out of 10 people will tell you he's God. He's the best executive that's ever lived. He's the best GM in the history of sports. I mean, this is like the narrative that's out there, right? Would you say that's accurately? If you just go and ask random NBA fans, they will all say Brad Stevens is the god of the gods in terms of GMs.
Right.
My problem with it is Danny Ainge is actually the one who built this team. He's nothing more than a leech, and he's probably the most overrated GM in the history of sports. And look, do I think Brad Stevens is a horrific sports mind? No. Like, there's 2 different categories here. Like, Craig Breslow shouldn't run a lemonade stand. I'm not saying he's Craig Breslow. Like, my stance is that he's not Craig Breslow. Craig Breslow should not be in charge of Toys R Us. What I'm saying is Brad Stevens, the narrative around him is completely false. He's basically a nepotism child, if we really want to think about it that way. All of these great gifts. And my question is, what's he really done with them? Like, what's he really done with them? Because the title team, and again, I have tabs open that we can go and show. I predicted they would win the title that year before it happened. It was built on the backs of Jason Tatum. Danny Ainge took a lot of shit for taking him. Like, I don't know if people remember this, but they had the number 1 pick that year. Everyone said, hey, go draft Markelle Fultz. We need Markelle Fultz. Danny Ainge said, nah, we're going to collect more assets. We're going to take Jason Tatum, and we're going to own Philadelphia for the next 15 years. Jaylen Brown. Nobody wanted them to take Jaylen Brown. He was like the 7th, 8th guy on the board. He said, hey, 3rd pick in the draft, we missed out on Ben Simmons. We missed out on Brandon Ingram. We're actually going to get a better guy in Jaylen Brown. So just like, they don't win the title without those guys. Those guys were taken on the backs of Ainge going against consensus. So that's really the problem I have with it. It's do we want to say Brad Stevens has been a total idiot? Not necessarily saying he's Breslow. What I am saying is the core of this team, the Jays, are the reason why this team won. And the boldness of Ainge is the reason why they're here.
I can see some of your points. And of course, like, even just with the Breslow talk, like, this can be a whole different discussion for an entirely different day, like just watching how the Red Sox have been. But Brad Stevens, in my mind, yes, inherited a roster that Danny Ainge left to him. And again, it was after like the bubble season and all that. The Celtics wanted to retain Brad Stevens in some way. Brad Stevens is a smart basketball mind. The Celtics, if he said he didn't want to coach anymore, the Celtics wouldn't have jumped at the opportunity to try to promote him to president.
I think that's a great talking point, because I don't know, we don't have to necessarily go over this, but I got into a Twitter argument with some random fucking nobodies who called me out and said, Brad Stevens inherited a 500 team. Because remember that year, they were like a 7 seed. They really weren't going anywhere. But nobody wants to bring up the fact that the team quit on Stevens. The team decided that he could no longer be the coach because he wasn't getting the best out of the guys on the team. And the reason why they were really good the following year is because Udoka was a hard ass. And then we want to credit Stevens for that team, even though he was part of the problem why they needed to shift him around.
I think also wouldn't technically Stevens have been the one to make the final decision to bring in Udoka? At least in my mind.
He hired the coach, right? But at the same time, Did he necessarily need to fire him for banging one of the staff members and then promoting Missoula? And then Missoula had zero staff. I don't know if anybody remembers that. They literally blew the Miami series because they got totally outcoached. It was Missoula's he was like the third guy in charge, right? They lost Will Hardy to the Jazz. Missoula was like the third guy in charge. They promoted him before he was ready and then never gave him an assistant.
There's many ways you can look at it, because in that Miami series, more specifically, like I think Miami doesn't win that series if Jason Tatum doesn't roll his ankle in the opening possessions anyway.
Possible.
But what I'm saying about
But they
Missoula,
did get totally outcoached that year.
oh yeah, they shouldn't have been down 3-0 to an eighth seed to begin with.
Never.
That was just like that was a magical run by Miami. But when it comes to the coaching situation, if anything, like obviously hindsight's 2020, but when it comes to Udoka, a lot of crap that he got over the course of the 2022 NBA Finals is a lack of adjustments, playing drop coverage on Steph Curry, one of the greatest shooter of all time. Even that, even if that was just like a warning sign, like I'm not saying that the Celtics were gonna immediately pack him up in that sense. Udoka gave the Celtics a reason to get him up out of there and try to just find a different coaching philosophy anyway. I think
Well, he did a better job than the last coach who the team quit on. He's a great coach, not a great hard ass.
I think it's just his demeanor. I can't look at him as that's his fault. Like obviously, like you're not going to expect somebody like Brad Stevens to have that kind of fire that like a Ime Udoka would have, or any of these other coaches around the league. So maybe it was that point, and there was that self-awareness. These guys aren't going to listen to what I say anymore. Missoula was able to fully have the reins in 2024, albeit with the best roster he probably could have ever asked for, on top of having two of the best players in the league and two of the best two-way players at that. Now leading up, you're hearing all this noise more in the general public and general media. Brad Stevens is under a lot more fire because of the way he's handling the situation with the Celtics this past year. I know you've been on record calling him out with a lot of the trades in terms of the Drew Holiday and Porzingis. We'll get to that in a second, but more so talking about the Giannis situation, because of course he got sent in that massive deal to Miami, and you said he's fumbled, and like you're not a big fan of how this leads the Celtics now with Jaylen Brown. So how do you feel about where the Celtics are at now that they ended up not getting Giannis and having to prolonging this with JB?
Well, my whole problem with the Giannis thing, or any of the sort of, hey, where are we at now thing, is that I think he's just a bad planner. Like, you either had to get Giannis or you should have never tried, because now you've pissed off Jaylen Brown, not just once, because remember, he offered him in a deal for Kevin Durant too. This is not the first time he's tried to dump him. So, hey, maybe the first time Jaylen Brown could kind of get over it, because it is Kevin Durant in his prime. So, you know what? Hey, anybody's on the table, I guess, for Kevin Durant. But when you do it a second time, after they already won the title, my whole stance with the Giannis thing is, in what world is Tyler Hero a better asset than Derek White? Because Miami got this done without sending a Jaylen Brown style of player. And I think you can make the argument that Jaylen Brown is worth more than every single piece that Miami gave up combined. Like my question to you is this: if Miami had offered the package they sent to Giannis straight up for Jaylen Brown, would you take it? How great was that Miami's offer? Like, I don't feel like they were ever in a, well, you have to offer Jaylen Brown to go get Giannis. My stance the entire time was, if you have any chance to win this title the way the Spurs are going, the way the Thunder are going, even the way the Knicks are going, because the Knicks have two wings in OG and Bridges, you have to match that. And you don't have a guard like Brunson. So my whole thing was, it needs to be Tatum, Brown, and Giannis. Derek White's a better asset than Tyler Hero. And the other pieces that Miami threw into the trade is Hugo Gonzalez, comparable to a Yakachonis. All the pieces that Miami gave up, the Celtics could have done that. They still have first-round picks to include in the trade. Derek White's a better asset than Tyler Hero. You could throw in a Cada, a Shireman, a Hugo Gonzalez, or whatever, a Pritchard. To me, Brown should have never been in those conversations. And once you put him in those conversations, now you've pissed him off. And now it's to the point where Jaylen Brown just called out Stevens. He basically called out the team saying, we got salary dumps on the team. And he's technically not wrong, because what the hell did they get for Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis?
They got Anthony Simons, which turned into Nick Vucevic, and then it snowballs from there. People were hoping he was going to be kind of like the Al Horford replacement type of guy. When it goes back to the Giannis situation and Jaylen Brown, I was 100% in like that line of thinking, because you look at the trades before when it comes to Desmond Bain in Orlando, Mikal Bridges. Those guys went for 3, 4. I think Mikal went for like 5 first-round picks
Yeah,
to get him into New York. Then you're meaning to tell me that Derek White isn't worth 4 or 5 first-round picks of a contending
exactly.
team or a team that
Exactly.
wants to be in contention? It doesn't make sense to me that why are the Celtics held to having to try to have a similar package that of Miami? Pretty much just like in terms of quantity, not in quality. Because if the Celtics added Jaylen Brown, Shireman, and Gonzalez and all that draft capital, I'm not trying to get Giannis. I'm trying to get somebody else who's in their mid to late 20s in their prime. That's
That
someone who
that should
can.
get you Wembanyama.
Right, right. I was like, even something like that. It's like that's somebody that you're trying to build around for the next 10 years because you're hoping that your team isn't, going to be complete ass because that's what that team's going to be left with. A lot of people try to compare this to if the Celtics would have got Giannis to that them grabbing KG. And my way of thinking is that why are you gutting the rest of your roster? Because it's not that simple. Because the Celtics back then, when they were able to make a big three, is a different NBA back then. You can get veterans that can be shooters and be able to build up a championship team that way. You have to find the guys on vet minimums to fill out the rest of the roster and hope that you luck into some guys in the draft. I think Miami's going to be better, and I don't think they're going to be one of the top seeds in the East. Maybe I think they're top 4 if they can play their cards right, bringing guys back and everything. But in terms of the Celtics would have been, yeah, you have Giannis and Tatum, and then you have D White, who could be on the move as well. I'm glad they ultimately were able to hold on and not have to trade Brown, but I think 2 first-round picks in Jaylen Brown was more than enough to get Giannis, even if it was just Giannis coming back. Giannis is going to be 32 in December. So this is and he's going to ask for another, a massive extension because right now, technically, he's on a 1-year deal if he doesn't exercise his player option after next season. So you're going to have to worry about paying that guy. People switching up expectations again. If the Celtics are in hell, essentially, Giannis starts aging, somebody who's very keen on his athleticism and his physical play. Derek White should have been the person, and then the Celtics shouldn't have not included Jaylen Brown. And I will say this about the Jaylen Brown situation, going back to Kevin Durant. People who just are looking at headlines on Twitter would be under the assumption the Celtics have always been shopping Jaylen Brown or always been trying to include Jaylen Brown in trade talks. Since Brad Stevens took the reins as president of basketball, that's only been those 2 instances. Giannis Antetokounmpo and Kevin Durant, 2 people who are all-time great players and will go down as all-time great players. Those are the only people that the Celtics have entertained throwing Jaylen Brown in a trade for. That has been reported anyway.
Except for now where they think they may have, poisoned the well and they may go down the route anyway. But yes.
Right, right. And I know you already mentioned that JB is going to be pissed off. Brad Stevens has made it a very awkward situation, to put it politely. Jaylen Brown's a smart person. Jaylen Brown is a smart basketball player. He's somebody who's already been very vocal about being at odds with the media, albeit his beef with Stephen A. Smith and all that. Jaylen Brown isn't looking at the headlines that he sees and is taking it at face value. I would think I'm under the impression that if Jaylen Brown wanted out, I think he would have made it abundantly clear he wanted out already. That doesn't mean that the Celtics aren't shopping him. That doesn't mean the Celtics are looking to trade him. All this could blow over and the Celtics are still having Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on the team. But my point being is that I don't think it's going to snowball as bad as I think. We'll figure out if Jaylen Brown wants to leave. I think the Celtics can still be good with both of those guys on the roster. I'm not trusting what everybody else is saying about this whole Jaylen Brown situation. He has a right to be pissed, absolutely.
I think Brad Stevens did a poor job in terms of negotiating the trade itself. And what I mean by that is there was that Windhorse report that came out that basically said Giannis's agent wants to control this thing because Giannis wants to make sure that the team that he goes to after the trade happens, that there are pieces that are still in place to where he thinks the team will be competitive. As you talked about, Giannis's contract is coming up. He can kind of decide, hey, you know what? I'm not going to extend there. Don't trade for me. I'm not going to extend to this place. Don't trade for me. Well, Brad Stevens in that Windhorst report, he refused to go through the agent. He only negotiated through the Bucks and then got so far down the road to where he refused to include Hugo Gonzalez and Baylor Shireman, and that's why they came up short in the deal. Brown should have never been involved in the trade. He should have immediately went to Giannis's agent and said, how do you feel about joining Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown? He should have won the negotiating battle with the agent, because at that point, Giannis should have said, holy shit, I can play with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. They already got under the tax apron. The trade would have been legally acceptable. And Derek White's a better asset than Tyler Hero. And then you could figure out the rest of the pieces. They still had 2 first-round picks. You could have thrown in the Hugo Gonzalez, Shireman, Neemias Queta, Pritchard, whatever it took. You have those big 3. If Brad Stevens is such a god GM, figure the rest out. I mean, automatically your favorites. The fact that he didn't do that is really alarming.
I understand where you're coming from because you want to pretty much get the player on your side.
Exactly.
So the Bucks in a position to have to really just negotiate through you anyway.
Exactly. And he never did that.
So
If you were going to try to do that, and you better get the deal done, buddy.
it makes in that case it makes more sense if it's a trade centered around Derek White that you're including these other assets, because it's at that point you bring in those three guys together and then you figure out, like, you work around the edges after that, because then you have somebody who's in that timeline, somebody who's
sure, like, maybe Derek White doesn't fit the Milwaukee timeline, but
then they flip him.
Exactly.
And that's when you get your draft capital.
And it was widely reported Minnesota wanted him, or several teams. I'm sure the Spurs would have loved them back, and some sort of Darren Fox, maybe, I don't know. But Derek White would have been the easiest guy ever to move in another deal.
Right. And I think obviously he's someone who fits a lot better than Tyler Hero getting flipped. Obviously, I think Milwaukee would try to hang on to him. Stevens going forward, the Jaylen Brown situation isn't salvageable. He could have easily just went out and said Jaylen Brown's no longer up for any other trade discussion.
Exactly. And that the press conference alone after the NBA draft, I would have slapped the shit out of him, man. Like, all he would have had to do at that press conference after coming up short in the deal is, we won a title with the Jays. We're happy that we have them. We don't discuss trades through the media. We look forward to bringing the championship back to Boston in 2027. Instead, he's doing this, well, we don't really know, and whether he's gone or not, we have a lot to celebrate. Like, you're telling them, what are you doing? That's your answer to the media?
Right. I think it's better. It's like the more boring of a response you could have made.
He could have shut this down immediately and just said, yeah, we don't discuss trades through the media, and we love Jaylen Brown, and we look forward to having him this year. Even if you thought you may even trade him or not, how is that not the response? Like, I don't know if people saw that press conference, and maybe we can include a clip without getting copyrighted, but wow, was it bad.
When all the Giannis stuff or any sort of like trade that could get involved, it's like the Celtics, that's really not how they have operated over the years. When it came to like the Drew Holiday trade and the Porzingis trades, we didn't hear that much smoke until it actually was close. An hour later, that's when it was like, oh, hey, the Celtics are getting those two guys in their respective deals anyway. Now with the Brown situation, he says that the Jays can win another title together. It's like, that's great. It's great to hear that, but that doesn't really answer the question. It's like you're still hearing reports about JB potentially being not necessarily on the block, but listening to teams' offers, looking at what could be out there. And in my mind, I think the Celtics are better off with those two guys together. But I think it's, people want to use the adage of, oh, Jaylen Brown wants his own team, and the quotes that he said that this was his favorite year. Missed me with all that extra shit.
Well, he's also got 3 more years under his contract, so it's not like even if they feel like they need to move him, they don't really need to, because he's under team control for another 3 years.
It's not like he's asked to get traded. He's probably more upset and he's hurt.
Also, at this point, okay, Giannis is gone. Who would you move Brown for? Like, who would you move Brown for?
There's probably a handful of people I would like have a Jaylen Brown center package around. I think Jaylen Brown's one of the best players in the NBA.
But I'm saying for Stevens to have that response in the press conference, who would you even consider him for at this point? Cooper Flag, and then I don't know.
Send him to Washington for AJ.
I don't think I'd even do it.
The only person I would trade Jaylen Brown for, like the profile that I would have to match, is somebody who is younger than him and someone who either has the makings of a superstar in this game or already has established them as a superstar.
Like, for me, it would have had to been like before the draft, Utah includes pick 2 and Jaren Jackson, or like something insane like that for me to even consider doing this.
Before the trade this morning, I would have said Anthony Edwards, but that's just my personal opinion. That's the type of player that I would consider trading Jaylen Brown for at this moment in time. But
now you've pissed off the player, and every single team that calls, they're not offering one of those guys.
Right. But at the same time, the Celtics, even though the player's disgruntled, even if he's full-blown requested a trade, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown know that they are fantastic together. And I feel like they're not going to get any more, like they're not going to achieve far greater success without playing with one another. I'm not saying that those guys wouldn't be successful if they had their own separate teams. So just trying to drive that wedge between the two of them. And then at the same time, it's like, I feel like people forgot what this team was capable of when both those guys were healthy. Because of course, in 2025, yeah, they probably would have still lost in the second round of the Knicks. But at the same time, like, people seemingly have forgotten how good these guys are together when they're both on the floor, and Jason Tatum coming back after a full season. I think it needs at least one more year to see what the team is, and then you continue and you want to have those discussions and see what what happens after that. If it was up to me, those guys are unequivocally my nucleus until those guys are retired. It's up to Brad Stevens to have to make sure either that still is the reality or does his best to try to make sure this doesn't, be a catastrophic problem for the next, the next year.
We'll see where people stand. I just think if you actually look at the evidence over the last 12 months, Brad Stevens has had way more bad moves than good moves in terms of what did he get for Drew Holiday? It turned into Anthony Simons, and then it turned into Vucevic. And then he got his belly pet by Cronin, where he got less draft capital because they claimed he failed the physical, even though Portland was still happily, willing to take him. And then it turned into Vucevic, who they're not going to bring back. So they got nothing for Drew Holiday. They turned Porzingis into George Niang, who turned into RJ Luis, who's now trying to go back to college to play for LSU. You traded Porzingis for a guy who's going back to college. The Hawks, who got Porzingis for free, turned him into Kuminga, who's a way better asset. So like over the past 12 months, those same role players who helped you win a title, you pissed them away for what? And then you were surprised your team wasn't the same and came up short.
So my thing, because I know you've said about this, about the Drew Holiday and Porzingis trade. We're under the impression that Jason Tatum was out for the year and this team is going to be bad. So they ended up trading Holiday and Porzingis to get out of money. They saved like 41 million or something like that.
But nobody forced them to sign those contract extensions either.
Right. And
they signed the contract extensions to the years where they felt like they needed to get out of them. So why sign the extension?
Jason Tatum doesn't get hurt in the 2025 series. I don't think these guys are shipped out as fast. Maybe Porzingis possibly, because he was dealing with POTS over the course of the postseason.
He's clearly not the same. If Porzingis has no trade value, why wouldn't you go to him and say, I'm going to need you to sign this deal. It's $8 million a year. They never did that. They never went to him and said, hey, I'm going to need you to take like a massive discount. Never did it. The conversation never happened.
I mean, at that point, that's why they just ended up just saying, hey, like if you guys don't mind taking his contract, well, like that, because that was their end goal. That was Brad Stevens' end goal over the course of the year, is that we're just going to try to shed salary, because if Jason Tatum's hurt,
shed salary on contracts they signed.
We'll look at that. It's like, yeah, you signed a 33-year-old Drew Holiday to an extension, established that this was a championship nucleus, but everybody was healthy. So, all right, let's just double down and triple down on that, because they also extended Derek White on top of Porzingis and Drew Holiday. But then it's like, all right, Jason Tatum's hurt. That wipes a whole year at the time, at the beginning of the season. That wipes a whole year. So at that point, Porzingis was compromised with what he was dealing with in the playoffs. And then they're over here looking at Drew Holiday being like, oh, this guy, he's going to go to get older. And of course, like we lost in the second round series, and Jalen Brunson had a great series in that with guys like Derek White and Drew Gardner. And it's not to say those guys were the reasons that they lost that series, but point being, they did that to get under the second apron. Why be in a financial hurdle when your best player is out and you're under the expectation is the team isn't going to be that good going into the year? So why be clipping the second apron? You're not putting the best team out on the floor.
My problem with it is planning. Like if you felt like Drew was too expensive, you needed him to take a less dollar amount. Like end of story. Like if you felt like the contract you signed was too expensive, why did you sign it? And now they're in a spot where they have this trade exception from this. Well, it's the trickle down of the Holiday thing. Well, why couldn't you turn that Holiday into the player that you want in this exception? Now you're in a spot where you don't have the assets to use for the exception because you didn't get enough for the original asset at the start. So like my thing is like, I think Trey Murphy would be a great fit for this team. He'd be a nice big who can stretch the floor. He can shoot threes. He's long. I think he'd be a great fit. He fits into that trade exception number. He's cheaper than the original Holiday number. Like, why couldn't you have used Holiday at the start? And if you're going to flip him or for Simons or whatever to get to a Murphy at the end goal anyway. We're now here and we don't have an end goal. We just have a large exception, which is what they had for the Fournier trade, and they didn't use that one either.
I think the Trey Murphy thing could still happen, but I see your points. In your mind is this magical, like otherworldly, all-time great GM. He would have saw that and made something like that happen.
Exactly.
The way I'm looking at it now, I would say some of the blights that he's had have happened over the course of maybe ever since the championship season, and mainly
I think he's been worse since the championship season than any other time.
I think it's because he's under a microscope especially this past year.
This is an underrated point. I don't think he knew what the rules were. Like, it sounds ridiculous, but if you really go back and watch some of those press conferences where he's talking about the apron, he looks like he saw a ghost. Like, he looks like he was just like totally unprepared for what these rules were. If you go back and watch those press conferences, he openly admits that like he didn't really understand the rules.
I mean, at the same time, weren't the Celtics like the first team to have to kind of deal with like this new CBA?
Exactly. They were. But it sounded like he was just like totally unprepared. Like, holy shit, I got to shed all this salary. Like, what am I going to do?
It's like, if you know it's something that you're unfamiliar with, get familiar. You had a championship nucleus. You still have it with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, but it's more so, are you going to break that nucleus up? What got them the 2024 championship is that he was able to put the best supporting cast possible around those two. So it's almost like if you do it again, the Celtics are in a great position to compete. Once again, they were a top 2 seed with Tatum hurt. Yes, they went out in the first round on top of a personnel issue. It was a coaching staff issue also in that series. But again, that's a topic down the line anyway. But when it comes to the Celtics now, you got Jason Tatum coming back healthy. Jaylen Brown, or not Jaylen Brown, or whatever you could possibly get from Jaylen Brown. I'm under the assumption that Jaylen Brown is going to be soon enough for the Celtics, albeit all the reports or everything like that. I think Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are going to play at least this next season together again, fully healthy. But at that point, is that you're trying to either rehabilitate that relationship that you've had with Jaylen Brown over the last 10 years. 2 days ago was like 10 years to the day Jaylen Brown has been a Celtic. Talking about like the Vucevic thing, and this trickles all the way back to the Drew Holiday thing. Trading for Anthony Simons, I like Anthony Simons when he was playing for the Celtics.
He did a great job.
Even then, like, you had the Celtics fan base being like, I don't want this guy gone. If anything, he would be a great addition to the Celtics team, because he's a guy, whether he was starting or coming off the bench, he was a guy who was exactly what we traded for in that sense in terms of talent. Was a guy who was a microwave scorer. And
but how hard would it have been to get him extended?
I don't think it would have been that bad. And honestly, it might even be easier now because he got traded to the Bulls and only played like 5 games. I don't think he's going to be demanding a ton of money. So I think the Celtics could easily bring somebody like that back. And even at the same time, like Porzingis, he's a free agent now. I think he's someone who can now be on a vet minimum. The Vucevic thing, that's something I'll find questionable, because you brought him in. Anthony Simons was a free agent at the end of the year anyway. So you try to build on your big man situation, because Keita, in my mind, Keita is a backup center that got starting minutes.
I agree. I don't have any problem playing him 15 minutes a night as the backup, though.
With Vucevic anyway, he virtually became your third string center down the line because he broke his finger.
He didn't play a single minute in Game 7.
Exactly.
Not a single minute.
At that point, I would have just stuck with the shot creating and shooting of Anthony Simons than to get Nick Vucevic, because you tried to cheap out on position of need to ultimately just be like, yeah, this guy sucks somewhere.
I thought the end of the year press conference when Brad Stevens said we need a big after he traded for Vucevic and played him 0 minutes in Game 7, I wanted to slap him. I wanted to slap him.
It makes you want to pull your hair out. Well, in my case, sorry, Trey.
I got a lot of it. Smart NBA fan will say this guy is God. If you go and look up and down his list of transactions, this is a guy who came from college basketball. The Celtics haven't drafted and developed a single player under Stevens from the college basketball ranks who's been a real contributor. Not one. He's been on a job for a long time. There's not been one college basketball player who's really impacted this Celtics team. Not one.
So you're saying guys like Baylor Shireman, guys like Jordan Walsh. I think, honestly, I think they've been pretty good when it comes to drafting. More so a product of getting a bigger role a lot sooner with Tatum going down. But you see guys like Shireman. I think Pritchard's been a key contributor.
Pritchard was an Ainge pick.
Oh, really?
Pritchard was an Ainge pick.
Oh, wait, he was 2020 draft.
I know for a fact Pritchard was an Ainge pick.
I'll take your word for it, because he's been really wing heavy the last few ones before drafting Sanak Jr.
I hate Walsh. I can't stand him. I think he sucks.
I think Shireman has become a real contributor. Brad Stevens overall has done a good job. I'm not going to be one of these people that will ignore a lot of the question marks in terms of some of the trades that he's made. Heavy on him when it came to like the Malcolm Brogdon and the Al Horford trades initially.
No hindsight bias.
Of course not, because it would be real easy to say, oh, hey, like that led to them getting Porzingis in the first place.
The whole Drew Holiday thing only happened because of Damian Lillard, too. Drew Holiday isn't a Celtic if Milwaukee doesn't make the Damian Lillard trade.
Right.
So they kind of got lucky in that sense. When they made the Porzingis trade, they sent Smart instead of Brogdon. I wanted Porzingis on the team for a long time. I was bothered that it wasn't Brogdon and it was Smart, and they got extra draft capital because it was Smart, and then use that draft capital to trade down and take Jordan Walsh.
I mean, I blame the Clippers in all this,
but they would have been stuck with Brogdon had Holiday not been sent to the Blazers.
They had a plan in mind with when Jason Tatum went down to shed money. And of course, like I know you brought up like the Kuminga thing with Porzingis. Kuminga wasn't valued by Golden State at all.
No, but he's a better asset than RJ Luis.
One team's trash is another team's gold mine. I honestly think my perception of Brad Stevens, regardless of how this offseason goes,
if they trade him for Evan Mobley, will you feel differently? Will you feel differently about Brad Stevens?
I would, if they traded Jaylen Brown for Evan Mobley, I would not like that trade one bit. Brad Stevens knows that Jaylen Brown's under contract for the next 3 years, regardless of if he's upset or not. Obviously, he would feel like he would have obligation to the player in that sense if he wants to leave, because of course that just doesn't make for, you know, a good on-court chemistry at that point. The Jays are better together. Evan Mobley, I'm sure, is a great player, and obviously a former defensive player of the year. If that's the best player you can get in a Jaylen Brown centric trade, I think that's taking a step back, because Jaylen Brown, while Evan Mobley is a fantastic defensive player, and obviously his offensive game is of course catching up to that, I think Jaylen Brown at this moment in time fits your timeline a whole lot better. Unless, because if you really need a big man that bad, you can do that Derek White trade for Gobert if you really had to. But that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't do it either. There's better ways to go about addressing that position.
Gobert makes every team he's on worse.
I think the Celtics could get a far better deal for Jaylen Brown than Evan Mobley. And it's not even to shit on Evan Mobley. It's just because Jaylen Brown is valued a lot higher than even if it was just a 1-for-1 swap. Like Jaylen Brown, unless it's getting a top 10 player in the NBA, Jaylen Brown is the best player in any negotiation a team could offer. Jaylen Brown's going to want to go to some place where he's going to be the number one guy. Celtics are better off keeping him, but I wouldn't like a Evan Mobley trade if it meant that.
To really put a bow on this thing, I just think we have to be honest in terms of if we look through the entire history of what Brad Stevens has done, his two greatest moves are getting the right supporting cast in place with Holiday and Porzingis. I just think he should get the same amount of blame in terms of credit for getting rid of those guys and having a disaster class in asset management. And the trades that aren't talked about enough are not getting Şengün, which it was widely reported they were going to draft him, to trade him in the Horford deal when Horford stiffed him for the 76ers is just unforgivable in my mind. Şengün would have been a perfect center for this team for a long time. The Gallinari thing, letting him play in the Olympics after he assigned him, after knowing that he had a history of knee problems, horrible. I mean, just horrible. The Brogdon trade never made a lick of sense. Giving up Nesmith would have been a perfect off-the-bench wing for them for a long time. He's had some horrific moves that nobody even wants to even bring up.
The Nesmith trade probably hurts you a little bit more, because maybe if they still had Nesmith, they probably would have never drafted Jordan Walsh in their eyes.
Probably.
Like, do you really think that he would have been able to contribute a lot more than Al Horford was to like the Celtics in order to like to win that 2024 championship? Yes. Because at that point, I'm assuming you don't try to trade for Porzingis at that point either.
Maybe, but at the same time, I think with Horford, like if he was coming back here, they should have made it, hey, you're coming back here for cheap. We're not giving up premium assets to bring you back after you stiffed us for the Sixers. Like that's just not happening.
What was included in that trade? It was like, it seemed like salary.
It was Kemba Walker and the pick that was Şengün.
Okay.
That was the trade, but it went to Oklahoma City, and Oklahoma City traded Şengün to Houston.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Oklahoma City probably should have just kept Şengün too.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're doing pretty well for themselves.
He's doing just fine, but Şengün, the biggest problem the Celtics had during those kind of windows is they couldn't rebound. Didn't have enough rebounders. And Horford can't jump, but he couldn't jump anymore. And you were relying on him to win all these rebounding battles that I think a young Şengün would have been the right piece for that.
I do think bringing Horford back was good, but also it was like the Kemba Walker contract was like so astronomically bad at that point that they had to give up a little bit extra, because that's how Sam Presti was operating at that time with the Thunder. In terms of Horford, I've said this before, I think the Celtics put too much value into Horford as he got older, even like years past, like when they got him. Even now, he's going to sign a 2-year deal with the Warriors at 40. And it's, again, even in 2025, the Celtics were still using the 38-year-old Al Horford to be the guy.
And I'm not saying Al Horford's a bad player, but like to give up a first-round pick to bring that guy back, this wasn't prime Al Horford anymore. This was old Al Horford, who the 76ers had to dump assets on for OKC to even take him the first time. And then you're giving up assets to get the same Al Horford?
Do you think this offseason is probably the most important in recent Celtics history?
I think Red Auerbach's rolling over in his grave and pissing in his grave because he was a way better executive than Brad Stevens ever was. Like, my whole problem with Brad Stevens is he's too soft. You got swindled out of draft picks because Portland claimed that Holiday failed the physical but took him anyway. Why? And the whole thing in terms of if he's God, if he's God, find the right role players to build this thing back up. If he's really this God GM, it really shouldn't be that hard to build a winning basketball team with Tatum and Brown. It really shouldn't be that hard to find the right role players to make this thing work.
I think he has the ability to do it, but I think we shall see.
I'm not calling him Craig Breslow. My take is a lot of people could have done what Stevens did based on the gifts that Danny Ainge gave this team. Because if we really boil this whole thing back full circle, the reason why the Celtics are good is because of the Brooklyn Nets trade of Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. And here's the thing that I want people to really think about. When's the time that Brooklyn has been good since? Go.
When they brought in Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving
for 1 year. They've been bad for a long time. And the reason why they're still fucking bad is because of that trade how many years ago? Going back to the Brad Stevens is soft theory. My problem with the way that he's navigated this tax is, why hasn't he used his own leverage? Why hasn't he used his own leverage in terms of, okay, the owner wants to cut money. Why can't he threaten the team and say, I'll go back and coach college basketball. You're going to pay this tax. He never did that. He never went to ownership and say, you're going to pay this tax or I'm out. And the fan base, based on the way they perceive Brad Stevens, they would have rioted. They would have called the team cheap. They would have said a lot of things about the team, but he never used that leverage. He just traded those guys for nothing anyway. If Trey was the GM and the owner came up to me and said, yeah, I'm going to need you to shed payroll, you know what I would have did in terms of spreading shit to the media to make sure ownership really knew what they were doing?
What?
Oh, I would have been, hey, you're going to pay this tax or I'm blackmailing a lot of shit. I don't think Stevens is that evil enough to do that.
You're saying he's like, if he was ballsy, he would have, in that press conference, he would have been like, guys, the reality of the situation is they want us to shed payroll. I don't think that that's necessary.
He could have done as simple as that and said, we're the Boston Celtics. We're one of the most historic franchises in all of sports. If we can't pay a little bit of a tax, we got a problem here.
I think in terms of like the previous CBA, that would have worked. But if like hanging around that number,
I'm not saying you have to be over the second apron. They're not paying a tax in general now.
To your point, once you realized the Celtics team was going to be better than expected, you could have doubled down on your chances to win this year instead of seeing what this team was made of, to only like, oh, we have Shireman, we have these young guys, Pritchard's playing well and all that, just to not have most of your depth play in the first round series against the 76ers anyway, and then try to like shoehorn them in game 7 to have them not do anything.
Even if they had just kept Simons and they were over, I think they would have been over maybe the original tax, not the second apron. They would have been over the original tax by a little bit. That wouldn't have been enough. Like, you want to beat Philadelphia then?
Being competitive.
Like when Danny Ainge was the GM of this team, we never lost to Philadelphia. Now we're losing to Philadelphia in the first round.
Blowing 3-1 leads. I think honestly, like while this past season I'm going to view it as an outlier, I think people are going to like hook onto that as for as long as possible until the Celtics are able to get that taste out of their mouth by actually fielding a roster that isn't more so.
Well, they got to get better.
Trying to save money. Team the way it's constructed right now does not deserve to make it out of the first round again. But of course, that's why I'm looking at Brad Stevens to put the best team that he can on the floor and either amend the situation with Jaylen Brown after all this Giannis crap, or find a way to get the best possible package to make the Celtics maintain competitiveness. But I'm following the way of thinking that they're going to work it out with Jaylen Brown, and they're going to try to work around the edges and bring in quality guys around those two to compete for years to come again. But I'm leaving it at that.
Okay, I think this was a productive conversation. We'll see.
Oh yeah,
we'll see what people think. But again, if people really go over the list, What's his good move? What's the move you guys are hanging on to in terms of he's a genius?
I
What's
think
the
the one
move? What's the move?
I could think of at least one. I would say, because honestly, it'll probably have us here for like another 20 minutes. But I think the legacy move for him is Derek White.
But I think Udoka is the one that pushed for that.
Really?
Well, that's a huge reason why they made that trade, is because the Spurs didn't really want to trade him. They felt like they needed to send him to a familiar face. Like Udoka is the one who really, really pushed for that trade. I don't think that trade happens if Udoka is not the coach. I think Udoka deserves a ton of credit for being the guy who was with the Spurs, who helped develop him, who helped convince the team to trade for him. I don't think that's a Brad Stevens fucking cooked something up out of nowhere. Like Udoka had a ton of history with Derek White.
Well, I think it's also like Udoka's not the one who's picking like the assets to get sent back, because you turned Romeo Langford, Josh Richardson, and picks or a pick to turn into Derek White, who eventually ended up during the 2024 season being one of the best, pretty much being the perfect role player to put with these guys. To your point, like if that's the case, Udoka saw what Derek White could eventually become. He wasn't around to reap the benefits of it anyway.
I'm not saying Brad Stevens should get blame or anything like that. I'm
Yeah,
just saying
yeah.
I'm not sure that trade even happens if Udoka doesn't have the history with Derek White. Because
Right.
remember, the Spurs didn't really want to move Derek White. A big reason why they did is they felt like they needed to rebuild, and Udoka was at least a guy that White had familiarity with.
You guys let us know, like what Celtics fans, what are your opinions of Brad Stevens? How do you feel about the Celtics in this current moment in time? Let us know in the comments down below. Let us know what you guys think, and keep it tapped into the YouTube channel and subscribe and show as much support as you guys can. It means the world to us over here at Vendetta Sports Media, and check us out over at vendettasportsmedia.com to stay up to date with all the NBA offseason, free agency, and all that good stuff, and stay tapped in with all your favorite sports over there as well. We'll see you guys next time.